Well, hello once again, and welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV, the home of old school vintage off-road bikes and racing, where we continue to cover all of the bikes and what went down over the course of the 3 days of this year's Offroad Motorsport Festival that was held here within the spectacular grounds of Drumlanrig Castle. Right, so in this next video here, we're going to take our final walk around the Drumlanrig race paddock, and following that, what we're going to do is show you the interviews that we filmed with the local celebrities on the Saturday night, and that way it'll leave us all clear to get on with the racing highlights that took place on the track from both the Saturday and the Sunday. So as you can gather, we've still got quite a lot of stuff still to show you from this fantastic event. So just to kick things off, we're going to start by having a quick look around some of the bikes and the parts that were on display in the Joe Maxwell engineering stand. That was all part of the many stalls and displays in and around the paddock at Drumlanrig this year. But just in case you've been off planet for the last 50 years or so, Joe Maxwell supply, manufacture and build parts and bikes for many of the old Alan Clues CCM Clues competition machines. And these ones that you're looking at here are just a small sample of the quality engineering components that Joe makes for these iconic CCMs. And basically, JME are a one-stop shop if you're looking for parts or services for the 1974 CCM motocrossers. And if you're a bit flush and maybe have some spare cash kicking around, then Joe will even build you a complete carbon copy of Alan Clues' 1974 CCM. And when you take all of those parts and then add the chassis, swing arm, engine tank and seat, then this is usually what you'll end up with, a brand new reproduction copy of one of Alan Clues' most popular models. And this particular bike here, Joe had it advertised for sale at just 16,995 of your finest British pounds, which I'm pretty sure was a special on the day sale price. But the reality is that these 74s cost much more than that just to put them together. So this one here is a bit of a bargain, although unfortunately I'm a bit short of the old readies myself this month, so I couldn't buy it. But a cracking bike, and certainly a bit of British racing history, even although this is just a reproduction copy. Anyhow, to your average motorcycle enthusiast, I think if you were to place one of these new 74s alongside an original one from that year, that's of course if you could even find one, I'm guessing that you would be quite hard pressed to actually tell the difference between the old and the new. And in fact, these reproduction bikes are probably much better quality due to the more modern materials and machining processes that you can now perform to make these retro motorcycles. But this was another bike that Joe had on display, and this featured bike here at one time I think was ridden by Joe's son Scott, and as you can see, it's an enduro version of the CCM with a full lighting kit and everything that you need to go on or off-road. Now, the engine in this Joe Maxwell chassis is a 500 with, I think it had a bore of 90mm and a stroke of 78, and the ignition system has a two-stage mapping, and the chassis is slightly different from the full Scrambles version, where the swing arm pivot is in front of the main frame tube. And naturally, as this is an enduro version of the CCM model, it has a bespoke built alloy fuel tank that's been made much bigger than the stock Scrambles item. So I think this one here held a full 10.5 litres of fuel. But once again, it's another cracking upgrade on one of Alan Cluse's CCMs, and although I'm not 100% sure, I think this enduro model is based around that 74 bike that we saw earlier. But then again, I might be wrong in that assumption. These could quite easily be a one-off special, because I never actually asked Joe on the day that I shot these clips. But whether this bike here was being offered for sale on the day, I'm not exactly sure, as there was no for sale sign on it. So I think Joe's maybe holding on to this one himself. And of course, it's not only the CCM scramblers that Joe builds. He also makes these reproduction copies of Alan Cluse's very popular 1978 350 trials bikes, which are again authentic in every detail and true to the 1978 original specs and design of those bikes. And I have to say, it still amazes me as to just how Joe manages to make these trials models so close to the originals, because let's not forget, original parts and other exotic components to build these bikes are more or less non-existent these days. So brand new replacement parts have to be made. And again, I've actually seen one of these new reproduction trials bikes sitting alongside a 78 original, and the resemblance is uncanny, other than, of course, the Maxwell bike is much more shiny because it's brand new. But once more, another reflection on the skills and the engineering of Joe Maxwell and his workshop at Thornhill in Dumfries. So again, it's an absolutely belter of a bike, and of course this time is being used for trials. And actually, just next to Joe Maxwell was Keith Barnes with his supplies of all the plastics that you need for your CCMs, and all the usual colours as well. So Keith and his Cumbria Classic Mouldings franchise are another good source of supply if you needing those precious replacement plastics to bring your old Cluse machines back to life. And these are again perfect reproduction items of the Alan Cluse originals. And Keith was also sporting a couple of nice replica race shirts there as well, although I don't know if these were actually for sale, because Keith still races a CCM of his own. So we'll just take a quick look at Keith's bike now, which once again is using another Joe Maxwell reproduction chassis and swing arm, and obviously a few other parts as well, but it's still a good looking 4-stroke thumper, and it certainly evokes memories of when these big CCMs were being ridden by some of the best motocross talent Britain had to offer in those golden days of the 1970s, when the likes of Jimmy Aird and Big Bob Wright, and even Keith's dad, Mike Barnes, who all rode these Cluse classics to huge successes while taking on some of the world's biggest and baddest Japanese two-strokes. But anyhow, it's great that the likes of Keith and, of course, Joe Maxwell are continuing to fly the flag for what still is one of the best 4-stroke scramblers ever built in the UK. But anyhow, let's just stick with the CCM theme for a couple of more minutes and take a look at Robbie Saville's 1981 580 CCM. Now, you know that we've always go on about how hard it is to find a true original example of these Alan Cluse machines. Well, look no further, because you've now found one, and maybe despite a couple of non-stock bits and pieces, Robbie's bike is the real deal with original frame, swing arm, engine, fuel tank, and I think even the front and rear hubs are the original Clues 1981 items, which once again are a couple of unobtainable parts that you just can't find nowadays. And powering Robbie's Clues 580 is once again the much rarer 4-valve CCM motor, and I think I'm right in saying that this is the 4-speeder as well in this chassis. And as far as my Clues knowledge goes, I think this model might have been one of the last of the Clues twin shockers. So as you can imagine, a very rare sighting of an elusive beast sitting proud here in its natural environment, when many of its original brothers will probably be all tucked up safe and sound and under lock and key and high security, because I think these original CCM bikes can fetch quite good money. And not only is Robbie's bike a precious item, he still races it regularly at these types of classic and twin shock race events. So it just goes to show you that although you don't actually see them very often, there are still rare gems scattered around the country. And I think in the last 10 or 15 years that I've been doing classic dirt bike TV, I think this is only about the third original example of an 80s CCM that I've actually come across. But you have to applaud Robbie for not only bringing it out into the daylight for us to have a look at. He'll be racing this bike on the Saturday in the Twin Shock Scramble event here at Drumlanrig Castle. So there you go, that's Robbie Savile's 580 CCM. Okay, so our next featured bike is James Hudson's 1977 YZ250 Yamaha, another quite fine example of a 70s monoshock classic. Now, the name James Hudson might not be too familiar to many of you watching, but I'm pretty sure that you'll know James's dad, Neil Hudson, who certainly needs no introduction when it comes to the world of motocross, because Neil himself was another one of Britain's racers, and at one time was the FIM World 250 motocross champion in 1981. So you can see that motorcycles and motocross definitely run in this particular family. Anyhow, this is, of course, James's race bike for the weekend, a 77 model of the hugely successful YZ Yamaha range of the late 70s, which of course had the single monoshock back end, which in itself was a bit of a revelation when you consider that many of the European bikes like Husqvarna's and Maikos and Bultakos and many others were still sticking with the old school twin shock suspension on the back, and it would do for a few years to come yet. So this modern style rear monoshock setup was well ahead of its time for that period. So as I remember, these 77 YZ250s were designated the 250D, and naturally these white and black and red bikes were the European version of the 77 250. But if you bought one of these internationally, like maybe in the USA in that year, then your YZ would have been the yellow and black variety. But as I remember, these were fantastic bikes, and they did have a good reputation for handling and power and reliability, which are only three reasons that these bikes were so popular. And in terms of the engine specs, it was a single-cylinder two-stroke with, I think these had a bore of 70 millimetres and a stroke of about 64. and the fuel was fed through a Mikuni VM36 SS carburetor into what was a 6-petal stainless steel reed valve intake. Now, in terms of the transmission, these YZs had a 5-speed gearbox, CDI electronic ignition, and the clutch again was your conventional wet oil-cooled multi-plate item. But again, straight from its packing crate and without doing any major tuning or other improvements to any of its engine components, these YZ250 engines were seriously quick, even by 1977 standards. Anyhow, James will be blasting around the track on this YZ250 when he races it in the pre-1978 Unlimited class, and you'll be able to see just exactly how he gets on when we get around to posting the racing highlights from Drumlanrig 2025. So there you go, that's James Hudson's YZ250 Yamaha. So from a relatively modern bike of the late 1970s to a proper old school classic from the 60s, and this is Scott Remington's 1960 BSA Gold Star 500, a real man's scrambler from back in the day when men were men and steel, chrome and alloy were the materials of choice for building these old school scramblers. And if you're of a certain age, then I'm pretty sure that you'll remember the good old days when the BBC would broadcast live winter scrambles on a Saturday afternoon as part of their BBC Grandstand Sports programme, when you'd be able to watch bikes quite similar to Scott's Goldie racing around those muddy winter racetracks when the cream of Britain's scrambles riders would be dicing on their Greaves and BSAs and many of the other British brands of that time. And usually they would all be up to their armpits in mud, and the crowds that used to attend those events were huge and certainly in their thousands, so it was very popular, as you can imagine. Now, this big 500cc Gold Star engine in this BSA was, as you can see, a big heavy lump, but it certainly wasn't short of grunt in the power department, and you can also see there how the bike's footrests were fixed onto the side of the clutch casing, probably just to give them a bit more height rather than bolting them onto the bottom of the frame rails. And again, the gearboxes on these old Beezers, I think, could have been the old Norton AMC units, but I've known to be wrong before. But this would probably be a 4-speeder, and of course that right hand footrest again is bolted onto the gearbox, and Scott's Goldie looks like it's got an improved oil filtration system with that cartridge filter being fixed onto the front of the airbox, which I must say I've never actually seen before. Now, back in 1960, this Gold Star engine would have probably used an old Amol monoblock or maybe even a concentric carburetor to fuel it, and Scott's went all up market here and he's swapped that for a Japanese Mikuni instead. But once again, the front brakes on this BSA are quite unusual in that they don't appear to have any back plates to keep out the dust and dirt and debris that would maybe cause problems. Now, whether this is some kind of special setup for these Goldies, I don't know, but it's a new thing that I've certainly never seen before on one of these vintage racers. And I suppose the one big advantage here is that it will certainly help to keep the brakes cooler, but I'd be a bit sceptical if things like small stones or that got into the intricate workings of the shoes and maybe cause some kind of damage. And moving on to the back of our 500 Gold Star, we've got the now famous QD wheel and hub, or Quick Detach to give it its full name, where basically you can just remove the entire back wheel and leave the brake, chain and sprocket attached, because the small part of the hub sits on splines. But you can imagine it must have been quite a hard shift for the guys riding these big heavy bikes back in the 60s with these very simple leather seats and maybe just 3 or 4 inches of travel on the suspension at the back. And you can imagine what it felt like for a rider when those much quicker and more nimble and very much lighter two-strokers came along, which although their suspension wasn't that much improved, you certainly didn't need muscles like big Arnie Schwarzenegger to keep them pointing in the right direction. But anyhow, a nice little blast from the past again. That's Scott Remington's lovely 1960 BSA Gold Star 500. But this was another interesting item that I snapped on Sunday, and this is Alan Bott's current race helmet for Drumlanrig 2025. Now, Alan did tell me that when he attends some of the big twin shock and classic racing events, he likes to kind of remember them by having a commemorative racing helmet, all painted up in some nice tidy graphics. And I'm pretty sure that this one here was originally done to remember the World Motocross Vets, which Alan was taking part in. And he's also got some interesting captions on it, like Forever Young, which I think more or less sums Alan up. And on the other side, we've got a wee tribute there to Alan's dad, who he told me he lost just recently. But it's all been very well done, and by one of Formula One's top graphic artists, who Alan tells me does some of the Formula One stars, including Lewis Hamilton. But no doubt you'll be able to see Alan wearing this particular helmet when we watch him race in the pre-1984 over 60s class. Right, so as we continue our Sunday morning walk around the Drumlanrig Paddock, next up it's Sam Sibbald's 1977 JBR 500 Yamaha. And Sam's a rider that I know quite well from the schoolboy days when Sam used to ride a BSA Bantam in the Scottish Formula Bantam Club in the early 1970s. Anyhow, this particular machine here of Sam's does indeed have a JBR chassis, but without the now familiar XR500 Honda engine, because this time Sam's has one of the 500cc SR Yamaha 4-strokers in the JBR chassis. So this bike is another quite high quality build. It was all done by classic bike builder and restorer Rob Spry, and Sam told me that this bike, prior to Sam acquiring it, was actually built for Rob's brother Chris Spry to race it at race events. Now naturally the original JBR chassis had to be slightly modified to accept the much taller SR Yamaha engine, which as I recall was from the street going version of the popular Yamaha TT trail bike. And just like the old 500 Honda XRs, this 4-banger SR500 did also have quite a good reputation for its power and reliability. That's of course as long as you took care of all the usual serviceable items, like change the oil and filter regularly, and then this motor here would give you good service and superb reliability. And because this bike here was built by Rob Spry, I'm pretty sure he would have done some kind of tuning to this SR to improve its performance by maybe fitting a high lift cam or a big bore kit. So you can only imagine what this big SR sounds like when it gets fired into life, and when that massive 4-banger dumps its exhaust note through this big megaphone here at the back. So there you go, that's one of a few nice JBR twin shockers that we've covered this weekend from Drumlanrig Castle, and that particular bike there is Sam Sibbald's SR500 John Banks twin shocker. So in the last video we were talking about how quite rare it is to see a Moto Vila around the paddocks these days, and this is our second one of the weekend, and this one here is Marcus Keers' 125. Now Marcus's Villa 125 is a bit of a variation of different parts, as I remember, and he didn't actually specify as to a particular year for this bike because of that fact, but nevertheless, to see two Italian Villa 125s at a classic and twin shock race event is quite rare, and I expect that it might even be a few years again before we see two of them in the same place at the same time. So anyhow, as we take a look at Marcus's Italian 125 two-stroke engine, which is again an amalgamation of two different types of engine. Now the bottom end of this one here is actually from the later liquid cooled Moto Vila engine, and the water cooled barrel and the head have now been substituted for that much earlier air cooled components. Now in this shot here you can see the water pump that was driven by the crank, which is now of course no longer required because the barrel and the head are now simply air cooled. And I do remember Marcus telling me that this particular engine here came out of a racing go-kart, which those four-wheelers used to use to good effect when they used these Moto Vila engines to power them. And as we make our way onto the front end of Marcus's bike, now the forks that were used on these Italian Vilas were usually Marzocchi's that for the late 1970s, when this bike was probably built, originally were seen as reasonably good for their time period. And again, at the back of these villas, when they left Villa HQ in the 1970s, would have again probably been some form of Marzocchi's, or maybe even a pair of Corticossos of some description. Although here in 2025, Marcus has got a decent pair of YSS classic shocks on his bike, which will be a million times better than those dodgy Italian originals. But I also remember that some of these villas had translucent plastic fuel tanks, which I thought was always a very good idea. No need, of course, to remove the cap just to see how much gas you had in it. You could see it very clearly here from the side. But certainly it's quite nice to see another rare European classic in the paddock, and still, of course, taking to the track as it was originally intended to when it was first built. So it looks like that we're going to be able to see at least two little Italian stallions racing each other when we watch Marcus Keers and Tim Grinrod race their respective villas in the Twin Shock 125 class. Now, I'd certainly like to have taken some nicer shots of Mitch Hughes's lovely 1964 Shenny Triumph 650, but it looks like I turned up on washing day because Mitch had all his bits and pieces draped over the bike. I think he was using it as an impromptu washing line for the day. So actually it was quite hard knowing where to point the camera to get the best shots, but nevertheless, if you can imagine Mitch's bike here without his mucky laundry draped over it, I can imagine that it would be quite a tidy piece of kit. Powered, of course, by this 650cc Triumph twin motor, and I'm not sure if there's been anything actually done to this engine to increase its power or performance, but I'm guessing that it'll not be a stock standard Triumph unit, and there was actually nobody around to tell me any different. But it does have this kind of 2-into-1 header pipe arrangement and a separate alloy oil tank that you can just about see there sitting on top of the gearbox. But besides that, as you know, it's another one of those quite nice hand-built chassis made by the late great Eric Sheney, who we've already mentioned on a previous Sheney example. And if it wasn't for Mitch trying to get his washing dried, we may have been able to see a little bit more of this bike, because I've already heard it on the track, and you certainly can't beat these Triumph twins for playing sweet music as they thunder around the racetrack. So there you go, another fitting tribute to the late great Eric Sheney and his frame building skills. That's Mitch Hughes's clothes dryer, and underneath it we've got his very nice 1964 Sheney Triumph 650, which hopefully we'll be able to take a look at when we get around to posting all the racing highlights from this event. Anyhow, just parked next to Mitch's Sheney was this old classic that I came across, and it's another one of those bikes that you don't see every day, and this is Gary Britton's Suzuki TM250, and Gary did actually tell me what year this bike was, but like every other thing that I was told during my paddock walks around Drumlanrig, it was usually quickly forgotten, but it's definitely a mid-70s machine, I'm pretty sure. And it certainly looks like a good original example of one of these early TMs, and it still has one or two different kind of parts on it from stock, which of course is to be expected with the age of the bike. But one of the more prominent features you'll maybe have noticed is that she's got quite a tall back end on this bike with these Hagen classic shocks on the back. But when this bike here was factory fresh, it probably would have had a pair of quite short and stubby shocks that only allowed a couple of inches of travel at the back. So Gary's bolted on these Hagens just to make the ride a little less bumpy. And Gary's even had his TM's fuel tank autographed by none other than the Suzuki racing legend himself, Roger DeCoster. And as far as I'm aware, this is still the original fuel tank for this little TM. So you can see that it's in quite good condition for its age. But as we move on into the engine department in these TMs, as I remember, these were quite good motors for their day. They had a 5-speed gearbox, as I remember, and were reasonably quick and reliable for such a small 250. And as you can see, in the early 70s, Suzuki were still using these old-style underslung exhaust systems in the 1970s, as of course many of the other manufacturers were doing, but this pipe here is of course a replacement item. Now, I think these engines were said to push out around the 27 horsepower mark, which I suppose is quite reasonable if it was actually true, but if this is a 1974 TM250, then I suppose it would have been the last of the TM range, as I remember, because I think Suzuki moved onto the RM series in 1975. Nevertheless, this was only one of two TMs that I actually saw over the course of the 3 days at Drumlanrig, and I think the other TM was being ridden by Steve Van Dom, so you can see that these TMs are becoming quite rare items, especially being able to see them on the track, because many owners of these old TMs do tend to keep them locked behind closed doors and maybe just use them as museum pieces only. Okay, as we make our way through the paddock now, you may remember from our episode 1 of our Drumlanrig paddock look around, we did say at that time that we'd come back to take another quick look at these Gabors Suzukis when we did Sunday's episode 3, and here they all are lined up regimental style and looking fantastic. And these again were one of the big crowd pullers over the course of the 3 days. But as I said in my last visit to these epic machines, I didn't actually get any background as to why these bikes were built in the first place, but essentially they are a collection of RM 400s, 465s and 500s, which I'm led to believe were all built by Jan Gabors, the Suzuki racing legend. And as far as I know, these bikes here weren't actually taking part in the race weekend, although I think there were a couple not in this particular lineup that were actually registered for racing on the day. And I've already documented a few of these bikes from a couple of years back when I filmed them at the Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show. And in fact, I think there's one in this assortment that was ridden by motocross legend Werner de Witt at Farleigh Castle. I think it was in 2012 or 2013. And as I remember, Werner was on top form on that particular bike. Anyhow, as to why some of them are numbered 99, I don't know, and I think there's even one in there in the centre that's numbered 999, which of course we all know what that number signifies, but even just as a static display, this assortment of Gabors RMs was pretty impressive, which is probably why they were drawing the crowds over the weekend, although then again it would have been quite good to see them all take to the track and bashing bars with some of the other big open class twin shockers. But a lovely collection of Gabors Suzukis. But just before we go on to our next bike, a quick mention here about my bijou accommodation for the 3 days, which, as you can see, was under canvas once again, so no hotels or 5-star luxury this time round. But to be fair, the Galloway Motorcycle Club, they did reserve a nice parking spot, especially for yours truly, and I think this is about the first time ever in more than 30 years of doing this kind of stuff that I've ever had my name on a parking place. So again, well done to Kenny Harper and the guys at the Galloway Club. But of course, many others were well suited and booted, and this big rig here certainly had all the bells and whistles and retractable bedrooms, etc. So no sleeping bags or sleeping under the stars for this guy. This is something that I'll definitely put on my Christmas list when Santa comes to call on December the 25th. Okay, so we're going to finish off our walk around the 2025 Offroad Festival event at Drumlanrig by taking a quick look at Alan Bott's 1997 Costler Myco 320, a bike that Alan recently purchased to use as a modern day kind of practice bike, but since then he's decided that he's simply got far too many bikes, so he's offering this one up for sale, and he says that he's going to stick with his collection of 81 Mega 2 Myco 490s, which of course he absolutely loves. Anyhow, this bike here of Alan's is all set up for motocross racing, and I'm pretty sure Alan told me that this was the GS 320 Enduro model, so he's also including all of the Enduro parts, like the front and the rear lighting kit, and you can see the Enduro rear mudguard there and light fitting sitting on the top of that rear tyre, just in case you're thinking that there's not much clearance between the tyre and this mudguard. So as you'd expect, this bike also has a V5 registration document, so I suppose you could put this on the road, but you'd maybe have to swap those knobbly tyres, because I think it might be a bit of a rough ride if you don't. And here in the engine department, we've got the 320cc liquid cooled Myco power plant, which I'm guessing will be quite a good enough engine with it being a Myco, but these 1997 models were probably the last ditch attempt to try and save the once great name of the Myco brand, because I think since the late 1980s various attempts were made to resurrect this once famous German name, and I suppose 1997 will have been more or less the last hurrah. But this bike does look the business, and I'm pretty sure Alan's ridden it a few times, but it appears that he's finding it quite hard to transverse from his beloved 81 Mega 2 490 twin shockers to this relatively modern monoshocker. And I suppose some riders are just simply suited to a particular make and model of machine, which is probably why they tend to stick to a specific brand for most of their racing career. And having said that, I expect that this will be quite a rare bike as well, because I don't suppose there would have been that many of these built in 1997, but it certainly got some good quality parts in it, like these Italian-made Marzocchi front forks, which of course will be a massive upgrade on the old Myco units of the 70s and 80s. And to slow or stop our GS320, we've got some nice high quality twin pot Italian Brembo hydraulic brakes here at the front and at the back. So for a 28-year-old motocrosser, this bike is still in quite good condition, and it doesn't look like it's seen much track action, but you've got plenty options of how you want to use this bike. You could ride it as is and use it as a motocrosser, or maybe even put the Enduro lighting kit back on it and do some green laning stuff with it, or maybe even put it back on the road as a wheelie machine to try and impress passers-by when you commute to work. But of course, before you put this bike on the road, you might want to fit a much smaller rear sprocket on this bike, because you'll not get much top speed out of this 320 with that big rear scramble sprocket still in place. Anyhow, a rather nice piece of Myco memorabilia there, and I expect a rare item as well. And more than likely by the time you're watching these video clips, Alan will have probably have sold the bike. So who knows, maybe sometime in the future we might even see this rare beast taking part in a race event near you. So there you go, that more or less finishes all of our Paddock walkabouts for Drumlanrig 2025. And coming up next, we're going to have a listen to our Master of Ceremonies for the weekend, John McCrink, and he'll be asking some questions to a few of the local scrambling stars that were at Drumlanrig this year. So look out for the likes of Tony Caig, Billy Edwards, Jimmy Aird, Bill Brown, Paul Chiappa, Andy Dykes, Willie Wallace, Mark Fulton, and, of course, Eddie Graham. And these interviews, again, look like they'll be in two separate parts due to the lengthy conversations that we had on the night. So that's what's coming up next here on Classic Dirt Bike TV.